I'm Hanif Kureishi. I'm a novelist, playwright, and screenwriter, and always available for paying work.
Thanks. How did you get involved in theatre?
I went to the Royal Court in the early 70s. When I was 18, I sent a play in to the Royal Court that my dad found a letter from them, and he said you should go in and see them. So I went in and I met Donald Howarth, and I met Samuel Beckett on my first day in. He was there rehearsing Footfalls with Billy Whitelaw. And they invited me to read scripts, and I worked there backstage, and I did everything in the theatre that you could do. And I thought, this is the life for me, this is great. And I met writers, directors, and I felt it was the first time I was in a place where I really felt at home, where I really felt I belonged with this community. But there were very few Asian or black or anybody of any other race. It was mostly public school.
Yeah.
English, white.
Did you go to public school?
No. I was my father was an immigrant. I came from a state school background. There was no real history of theatre in my family.
So what inspired you to go to theatre in particular?
Well, I wanted to be a writer, but I didn't want to sit at home on my own writing all the time. I wanted, as it were, to work with other people. And I was inspired, I think, by John Osborne, by the idea of writing pictures of contemporary Britain, that part of the job of the theatre was to be political and social in the sense that you engaged with the time in which you lived. I think it was the fact of the Royal Court being, as it were, contemporary that really compelled me.
What was it that made you feel as though you wanted to have a social comment on your time? Was there something that inspired you?
Well, I wanted to comment on my time because that was really the TV also I'd grown up on, really.
Yeah.
Dennis Potter, Alan Bennett, all those plays for today, the Wednesday play, a lot of that stuff directed by Stephen Frears. I felt it was contemporary. It was about class. It wasn't really about race, but it was about class. And it was amazing to see the world in which you live, the schools you went to, the factories that your neighbours worked in on telly. That literature wasn't, as it were, only in the past. It wasn't only this idealised Shakespeare or Dickens from another period. It was about what was happening now that excited me then. Yeah.
You said it wasn't about race, mainly about class. Was it that you wanted to feel? Was it that you felt you wanted to fill that void and talk about race?
Well, I think I wanted to get some sense, to make some sense of what the hell I was doing in Britain.
Okay.
My father had come from Bombay. He'd married an Englishwoman, my mother. I came from a vast Muslim family. And I was a Paki. And I wanted to know what that meant and what I was doing here and how all these, let's say, historical forces had brought this boy to South London who loved Jimi Hendrix. And so basically I was writing for years what became My Beautiful Laundrette and later on The Buddha of Suburbia. My early works about my, as it were, derivation, trying to work out why I was there and who I was from and what I meant. So I was trying to do something quite interesting, which was actually a theatrical idea, which was to link my own life to history and to the world.
You say you were a Paki. I suppose that term has now evolved in some circles into being British South Asian. What does that term British South Asian mean to you?
Well, I had to learn what it was to be British, which meant that Britain had to reinvent itself for my benefit rather than the other way around. By which I mean that Britain had to see that it had become a different kind of place. It took a long time for that penny to drop, And one of the ways in which that penny dropped was because people began to write about Britain differently. And I think certainly My Beautiful Laundrette, and certainly I think Midnight's Children, and then the emergence after that of many black and Asian writers, particularly Zadie Smith, particularly made a huge difference and of course then the emergence of black and Asian actors. Also MTV bringing people like Prince, for instance, as well into the limelight. So there's a whole conjunction of forces, really, which meant that what we call world culture, or world music, or world food, or world writing, or voices from elsewhere began to move towards the centre.
So that term British South Asian, you see that as a piece within a larger puzzle?
Well, the puzzle is really to do with the identity of Britain, what it means, and how it began to see itself differently, rather than, in the end, you realise that it isn't your problem, it's their problem. It's like the problem, it's like with madness. I mean, the problem with madness is not madness, it's the normal people. It's the concepts, the ideas you have about how the world should be that are too limiting. You have to open them up so you can see more. You need more words, you need a better language, you need to see more, to understand more. And one of the ways in which you do that is through culture.
With this term then, and as you say, the need for the vocabulary to increase, I suppose, it feels to me to legitimise that term more, the term British South Asian, is work that's attributed to it as well? Do you feel your work can be attributed to the British South Asian banner?
I'm a writer, I don't care. I just write books that people like or they don't write, and I'm a British writer. Yeah. All this other stuff is just a lot of guff to me, it's irrelevant. I mean, I try and make contact with a reader.
Yeah.
And
but you help them with the breadth of readers. Just this morning I was reading Outskirts and Borderlines. They seem like two different worlds, but at the same time from the same world. But they do target two different audiences, would you say? Even if you didn't mean that.
I never knew I don't think most writers know who their audience is. You find an audience, you hope for the best, you write something. Yeah. I mean, I wrote My Beautiful Laundrette. It was about a skinhead and a Paki kissing and then having sex in a laundrette. I didn't realise there'd be a mass worldwide audience for this, that people would want it, You need an audience as a writer, but in a sense, we had to make an audience.
Yeah.
Rushdie and I and the early writers, and certainly Naipaul before him, had to make an audience to say, look, there are these new voices, we represent this new world, have a look at this because this is actually happening to you and around you. Just as John Osborne had to remind people that this was right at the centre of the world as it was happening. Mm-hmm. So you create an audience too, but there's an audience already there. I mean, both those things.
Do you think that it's useful to consider British South Asian theatre as a distinct label or world?
Well, British culture I would talk about and how it's changed. Dance, certainly through Akram, who's a genius. Literature through Zaidi, Belmont, poetry. I mean, the whole of culture's changed and had to change because we're more present and these stories are really important. Mm-hmm. And in a sense, all of culture has to be in a state of, as it were, permanent revolution, and entirely depends on the new.
Could you describe, coming back to you for a little while, could you describe your own artistic journey? So if we start from the Royal Court to where you are today.
Well, just learning to be a writer, whatever that means, working out characters, situations, how the characters speak, conflicts between them, that as it will work for me as an artist, that seem right for me, and somehow will speak to an audience about their concerns. But particularly in the theatre, and certainly it's really to do with changing audiences. I mean, theatre audiences on the whole are ghastly. We're always ghastly. We're too limited. I mean, it's just, late middle-aged white people. You go to the National Theatre now, it's the same.
Do you think it's always been that way?
Well, you really have to make an effort to find new audiences. We toured. In the end, I cured it by doing a film. Huge amounts of people went to see My Beautiful Laundrette in the cinema, but they wouldn't have gone to see it in the theatre.
Do you
just do it in the movies.
Work?
Well, it's helped change the climate, I think. It helped change the climate insofar as people then thought, so-called Asians or black writers and so on, are speaking to all of us, not just to a small minority audience. I mean, that was always the fear in the theatre, that somehow the only people who would see a play about a Pakistani would be other Pakistani people, that this was not of general interest. I think My Beautiful Laundrette and certainly Midnight's Children showed that we were not minorities in that sense.
So what is it about film then that people go see your work in theatre that they want?
Well, with the movies, it's really to do with, in My Beautiful Laundrette, we had a star. Daniel Day-Lewis became, around that time, sort of world star. He's one of the, you know, he's probably the best actor in the world now. So we were lucky that we could cast him, as it were, get him cheap. And also, that was around the time when the gay thing was really coming to prominence. It was really important that sexual minorities' voices were being heard at the same time as women's voices were being heard, and at the same time as, you know, racial minorities' voices were being heard. We were all, as it were, part of the same crew. And My Beautiful Laundrette somehow brought all that stuff together.
That crew, does it still exist today as a whole?
I think the crew, as you refer to, is really fragmented. You know, the so-called Asian cause has become, you know, radical Islam. You know, the women became really middle class. And the gay thing got very, very narcissistic, it seems to me. So there has never been a united front. Well, there was, maybe in the 70s. But it's long gone now. We don't really have a left in that sense. We certainly don't have a working class, and we don't have a left. We don't have a united front of so-called minorities' voices now.
Do you think that affects the work?
No. Artists are very creative. And the work that's coming out of... I mean, London is an amazingly creative city. It's a fantastic place to be in. And the amount of creativity among young people of all races, colours, ages is fantastic.
I'm curious, with your family, your own personal family, was there any reluctance felt by any individuals when you decided you wanted to be a writer?
Well, I come from a writing family. My uncles were writers, my father wanted to be a writer, so it wasn't such a big deal. I didn't have my mother screaming, crying, we want you to be a doctor, you know, all that rubbish. But with Asian families, the truth is that the kids have to educate the parents. You know, they really do. They really have to educate the parents into what sort of people they are, the young people, what they want to do, what it is to be an artist, to be a writer. It's a profession. You know, I'm a professional writer. I'm an artist, but I'm a professional writer. I make a living, I support my family. I'm, you know, respectable, indeed far more respectable than most doctors. So we have to educate the elders in that respect, that we're not going to be poor, starving artists always. There's always that possibility.
Of course. In what way have you reconciled, and now this is an evolving question, that, you know, and the answer evolves with it.
What?
What I'm about to ask is probably an evolving question.
Yeah.
But in what way currently do you see your transnational experience informing your identity?
Well, who I am is what comes out, you might say. When I sit down to write, as it were, the whole of my soul, my psyche, my history, my being seeps into my work. So the way I think about race, the way I think about immigration, the way I think about my father, the way I think about Islam, the way I think about women, the way I think about sexuality, the way I have thought about everything is informed by my history, is informed by who I am and how I've lived and where I come from, and comes out of my work in some ways that, as it were, are also unknown to me, that are sort of unpredictable to me. So
is it fair
you are what you write, but you are what you write in ways that, let's say, are unpredictable.
And how can you suggest, I mean, do you realise how your work has evolved over time, as your identity has evolved over time?
My work's huge in its... because there's more and more of it now, you know. I've been around nearly 60. When I look at it, I think, God, there's loads of it now. And it's still coming out. I've got a novel coming out, The Last Word. I've got a movie on the weekend. I've got lots of stuff cooking. I mean, I'm amazed by that. that it's lasted this long. I've done so much. But I'm still alive and I still have ideas.
Where do you feel the state of theatre is today?
I go to the theatre. I saw a great play about dervishes upstairs at the Royal Court the other day. You see it?
Dżinżywidka?
Yeah.
No, I haven't seen it.
Yeah, I really liked it. And there's some great stuff going down at the Young Vic.
Mhm.
Some very good stuff going on at the Lyric in Hammersmith. You know, I like what Sean's doing over there. So I go to the theatre now and again. It seems much, much more lively than it used to be.
Mhm.
And the voices are more multiple than they were before. There are more people you hear from. I mean, it was a very, very narrow... I mean, you look at the history of the National Theatre on the TV the other night and you just think it's so narrow. It's shocking how narrow it is, and the range of experience that they represent is so, as it were, politically correct. You really see how exclusion works, but it works unconsciously. It's not, as it were, people deliberately excluding the voices of other people. They don't even notice that's how power works. It's interesting. They don't even see that it's happening.
So what's the antidote? Is it to make a film, as it was in your case?
The antidote is for artists to work as they wish. The antidote is for artists to find a way to work that satisfies them, and then to find an audience. There are thousands of new ways to work, you know, particularly through the internet and working cheaply and the new technology and etc., etc. I mean, the internet has really freed people as artists. It doesn't necessarily mean they're going to reach large audiences, but it's made all sorts of cultural, creative opportunities possible.
Unless there's anything else you'd like to ask.
You ask the questions. One more question.
Yeah, my final question is just, what would you like to tell us about which particular work of yours holds the most importance for you, and why?
Well, I think My Beautiful Laundrette was a breakthrough. It was so bold, and we made it so naively, and it changed all of our lives. You know, everybody involved in it, from Saeed Jaffrey to Tim Bevan, who produced it, to Stephen Frears, obviously Dan, Gordon.
Change your lives professionally?
Totally changed our lives professionally, gave us opportunities that we hadn't had before. You could make other films, you could get other jobs. I think that was really the turning point, and a real turning point in British culture as well. That was when the door opened. When those two boys kissed, the door opened to other worlds and other voices. And that door would never close again.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.